Everyone, let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, I really want to welcome you, want to thank you for being here and welcome to this PRIMRE sponsored webinar entitled Introducing Telesto, PRIMRE's Knowledge Hub for Marine Energy Development Resources and Guidance. My name is Cesar Castillo. I'm from Sandia National Laboratories. And today our presenters that we will have are Will Poplinski, also from Sandia National Laboratories, and Megan Anderson from Sandia National Laboratories. We also have Hannah Fields here. She will not be presenting, but she was integral in the development aspects of Telesto and in the content that we'll be seeing in this presentation. So we wanted to make sure we acknowledge her here. So for those of you who are familiar with PRIMRE and Telesto, you will know that Telesto was already existed prior to this presentation, but what's been happening over the past year or so is Telesto itself was kind of undergone a revamping, where a lot of the existing content was kind of reorganized, and we incorporated new content. And all of this reorganization and incorporation of content is kind of undergoing as we speak. So there will be opportunities that we have for members of the audience to kind of help with shaping what Telesto will be in the future. And before we get going on the actual presentation, just a little bit more on housekeeping. First is that the presentation is being recorded. It will go up on the web sometime after the webinar has concluded. And that will take maybe about a week or so because we have to do a little bit of cleanup, but it will be available afterwards for those of you who want to revisit it. And anybody who registered for the webinar will be notified when that recording is available. Second, there's a chat feature for this particular presentation, and then that chat feature will be used to kind of provide the links to some of the pages that are being showcased. So if you want to follow along live with the pages on the site, feel free to do it there. But the chat feature is also a place where we welcome you to place questions that that we will try to address. With regards to questions, we will try to, they will all be answered at the end of the presentation. The presentation will not take the whole hour. There will be plenty of time for questions and other discussion at the end of the presentation. So we welcome all questions, but they will all be answered at the end of the presentation. And again, welcome, and I'll get going with the first slide. Here we go. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, some people might be familiar with PRIMRE and others might not. PRIMRE is the portal and repository of information on marine renewable energy. And this is a project that is funded by the Water Power Technologies Office of the U.S. Department of Energy. And it is currently being undertaken by 3 national laboratories. It is being led at this point by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And it's also with help from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and Sandia National Laboratory. And what the PRIMRE is largely consists of is 7 knowledge hubs. And these knowledge hubs, I will describe them in a little bit more detail in the following slide, but it kind of shows that these different knowledge hubs that have different types of information. And the other content that you will find within PRIMRE is we also have some information on marine energy basics. So kind of like Marine Energy 101. It kind of describes some of the different types of resources that we try to use for marine energy and the technology archetypes that try to address those. Other things that we have on PRIMRE are the events calendar and webinars. There's also educational resources and just access to other data, tools, and software that are relevant to marine energy. And there's plenty of other, on the PRIMRE site, there's plenty of other webinars and other content that we welcome you all to come and explore so you can get to know PRIMRE in a lot more detail. But for the sake of time, we'll go on to the next slide. And then first, obviously, this presentation is rooted in describing how Telesto has been reorganized, but Telesto is just one of 7 knowledge hubs. And these 7 knowledge hubs, as you can see here, they're all on the right and kind of listed in the order in which they came to fruition. The first one is MHKDR, and that kind of hosts data and other content from projects that were funded by the Water Power Technology Office. So that is more of a data repository. Second is Tethys, and Tethys hosts papers and reports and other documents that are associated with the environmental effects of marine energy projects, and also from offshore wind. And those were the first two that existed prior of these knowledge hubs. With the launch of the PRIMRE project, shortly after it became Tethys Engineering. And Tethys Engineering is very similar to Tethys, but instead of it being environmental effects, it hosts technical documents. So the engineering aspects of marine energy and those kinds of aspects. Another knowledge hub that came about shortly after the launch of the PRIMRE project was the marine energy software, and it hosts just code and software that is relevant to marine energy. So some of it might be custom made for marine energy, or other software that's out there that's been tailored to be used for the marine energy industry. After marine energy, the initial release of Telesto came about, and it mostly held guidance on testing and measurements. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the following slides. And then we also have two of the latest knowledge that came about. One is the Marine Energy Projects Database, and that is a kind of a relational database that shows information on projects that happened in open water. So it shows kind of the devices, the organizations, and kind of the technologies that they used. And it kind of just shows kind of this interrelated relationship for all these projects. And then last is the Marine Energy Atlas, and it tends to hold geospatial data of resource characterization, but other GIS data that is relevant for marine energy. And these 7 knowledge hubs that form the core of what PRIMRE is, they are all tied together through a one-stop search that makes it possible to access the information from each of these particular resources. And then I'll just go on to the next slide. So now that I've kind of introduced PRIMRE and what it is, I want to kind of show what Telesto was prior to this revamping that we've done in the past 12 months or so. So the initial release of Telesto came about in 2020. And originally it was a set of databases and like kind of wiki-based guidance, mostly associated with testing and measurement. So there would be specific types of tests, whether they be tank testing, bench testing, lab testing, and kind of a lot of the instrumentation and the techniques that you would do to go about in doing that testing. But as time went on, we kind of realized that there was a lot more that we could incorporate into this particular knowledge hub. And so we kind of listed here some of the factors that drove the reorganization of Telesto. So first and foremost, we know that when it comes to marine energy, there's a lot of other aspects that not just testing and measurement. We wanted to kind of encompass a larger aspect of it, and I'll describe that in the following slides. The other aspect is that the upkeep of the content on Telesto became kind of a lot of the links and all that kind of became broken, and we wanted to make sure that it was all current and making sure that the instruments and the tests that they were doing were the latest and greatest things that are being used in the industry. And finally, the other things that kind of drove the reorganization is that we became aware of new content, whether they be applications or other databases that we thought would be good to incorporate into Telesto. And having it all under this organized knowledge hub made it possible so that we could kind of guide the advances of the field. And then going on to the next slide. So the way we reorganized Telesto, we decided to follow what we described as the marine energy development pathway. And what we described with that is that if you think about a project or you think about a technology, there tends to be like 5 main steps that you would follow. And that they include planning, the design and build, the testing, the deploying, and the decommissioning. Now, and this is how we kind of laid out the navigation bar that you will see on Telesto if you ever go there. But we kind of had it in this kind of linear kind of path that you would follow. But what we did that in that this is kind of the approach that one would take, but it's a very iterative process. So whenever one goes into planning, once you start doing your designing and your building, you realize that you might have to go back to the planning phase and reinitiate this development pathway. So there's also for all these steps, sometimes there is an iterative process that you follow to go back into one of these previous phases. And within each of these particular phases, there's a lot of other content that we have there as well. And then, so this is kind of the main navigation paint bar that we have for Telesto. And then what you will also see underneath it, and this will also be described in the coming slides, is that there are these kind of other categories of content that we have that kind of span the scope of all of this. And they include lessons learned, some of the performance metrics that are used to gauge the performance of each of these, economics, the standards, and the compliance aspects that one would follow. And now that I've kind of described how we laid out the reorganization of Telesto, we'll go on to the next slide, and I'll pass this along to Will so that he can describe the project planning section of Telesto. Go ahead, Will.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm coming through?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So the vision for the site was to provide access for developers to the tools that have been developed with WPTO funding in a logically consistent scheme. So that's we chose the development pathway. But not all developers are really interested in everything here. There's technology developers and there's project developers. And the project developers are really who we're shooting for here. So under project planning, the major topics for these pages are in blue. And then the icons sort of denote what the tools or sources are. So we have opportunities here, we have funding, we have resource characterization, and we have stakeholders. And then on all the pages, we've got a breakout of some of the international standards and applicable lessons learned. So looking back at opportunities. So when you get into marine energy, you're going to focus somewhere. And right now it's basically one of two things. You're going to focus on the continental grid connection, or you're going to focus on something smaller like powering the blue economy. So if you're going to focus on the grid connection, you're going to start talking to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. And they have some permitting applications you have to go through. And so we're linking here directly to the FERC permitting application, which if you actually try and look for it at the FERC site, it's buried multiple levels down. So this is a real shortcut. Then under powering the blue economy, if you're going to go to something smaller, you're going to be interested in things like ocean observation, microgrids, isolated communities, maybe powering platforms at sea or UAV recharging. So here we're linking to WPTO's Powering the Blue Economy report, which gives you a lot more detail, a lot more opportunities, and how to focus that. In terms of funding, the little buoy icon is going to be a link to WPTO's resources page. WPTO is the main public funder for marine energy development. You know, you can apply for money, and there's also the prizes that the WPTO is overseeing. There's the new release just the last couple of weeks of Power at Sea prize. Submissions for the concept phase are due July 26th, 2024. So it pays to keep a check on what's going on in the prizes page. Resource characterization. WPTO has a long-term resource characterization project started in 2016, and PRIMRE hosts a signature project page which compiles all that knowledge, all those reports, publications in one spot. So that'll take you there. The little Earth icon, that represents the Marine Energy Atlas, which is one of the PRIMRE knowledge hubs, which Cesar mentioned previously, and GIS-based wave resource data. So you can also input a power matrix for your device there and get a capacity factor back. So that's very cool. The little wave icon with marine energy, that's part of the tool for the Marine Energy Environmental Toolkit. And that's more of like an environmental and permitting tool developed with WPTO funding. You can choose a site and then do searches on publications and licensing documents based on stressors and receptors. So like what animals, what plants or fish are there. And it's a way to search FERC licensing documents, historical FERC licensing documents. Under the issue of stakeholders, this is like a reminder when you're in your planning phase that you need to interact with your stakeholders. You need to figure out who they are and meet them and start coming to consensus about how all this is going to move forward, because projects have crashed and burned because they've ignored their stakeholders. And there's a nice write-up in the 2020 State of the Science report about stakeholders and how to start that process. International standards related to planning. This is pretty much, we're linking to the IEC 62600 standards 101, 201, 301. That's resource assessment standards. So sort of related to resource characterization, how are you going to go about determining how much energy you're going to be able to access at whatever site you're thinking about. Next slide, Cesar. So the next phase in the, you got it? The next phase in the development pathway is design and build. So you're moving on beyond planning. And the first thing we're referencing here is marine energy software, which is the PRIMRE Knowledge Hub. And that's going to give you the ability to look at open source software and links to commercial sites. You can use a filtered search, hone in on things you're interested in, and the design software covers things like marine structures, turbine blades, pumps, compressors, CFD packages, wave spectra. It's pretty all-encompassing. You can use it for your initial design and testing once you start building. Technology performance level is a long-term project funded by WPTO. It's for developers, it's sort of educational and as a design tool to evaluate the device you're building, with particular emphasis on commercial practicality of the project. So it's a series of questions, and by the time you get to TRL 7 and 8, you're going to have to answer all these questions, because it's just, if you're going to put a full-scale device in the water, you're going to want to know all the details. And so that's the technology performance level, is presenting you those questions when you're at a TRL of 2 and 3. So you can sort of see what you're going to have to think about and where you're going to be going. The advanced materials and manufacturing site is a collaboration between Sandia National Labs, Pacific Northwest National Labs, NREL, Montana State University, and Florida Atlantic University. It's a series of publications, webinar recordings, and a database on materials in tested in a marine environment. And it's designed to look at the design difficulties based on materials. And it's looking at composites and how it interacts with the fluids and manufacturing difficulties. There's 4 webinar recordings at the advanced materials site. So there's a lot of information there. Can be very useful. Foundations and moorings, that's links to Tethys Engineering, which is one of the PRIMRE knowledge hubs. And Tethys Engineering has got a collection of all the latest research and design documents from publications. It's curated on moorings, anchors, structural performance. So that's a lot of information there. You should take advantage of it. And international standards in this realm of designing and building, there are a lot of standards. People have been building in the marine environment for centuries, and all those standards exist, and it's great if the developers would take a look at them and see what they're up against. So this is linking to IEC standards, ISO standards, and API standards. And the API standards, that's American Petroleum Institute, what do we have to do with platforms? We're not building platforms, but it's, you're building steel structures in the ocean. So there could be some good information there. Next slide. That's testing and measurement. And I will turn that over to Megan Anderson, who has been doing a lot of the development on this slide.
Thanks, Will. So yeah, like Will said, the next step in the development pathway is testing and measurements. Starting on the top left, we have the testing facilities database. Right now, we're planning to revamp it over the next fiscal year. But currently, if you visit that site, you can find an interactive map with also a list of the testing facilities that have services available in the commercial, academic, and even government spaces. So all of that just lives in there, as well as some links to TEAMR sites as well. Going to open water test sites. This links you back to the projects database, and there's a list of all the open water test sites that exist internationally, so not just in the US, which the testing facilities database is right now. Marine energy testing guidance. I'll talk a bit more about this on the next slide, but essentially this section is giving some pretty low level, knowledge and details about what tests and measurements can occur within testing facilities that we have mentioned in those other two, testing facilities database and open water test sites. Data acquisition, we have a little bit of information about MODAC, so the Modular Ocean Data Acquisition System, MiniDAC, which links back to Tethys Engineering, and some other research centers and monitoring packages is in there as well. So within data processing, there's information on marine energy software, linking back to the Knowledge Hub that Will and Cesar already mentioned, as well as information on TS-DAT, also known as the Marine Energy Pipeline, which essentially is a pipeline framework in Python that standardizes time series data useful in the marine energy space. And testing partners, nice, yeah. So there's a whole section here regarding TEAMR. It links back to a site within the signature projects, and there's a list of things that have come out of TEAMR awards. So data sets, papers, stuff like that is all linked here. And you can also go back to the TEAMR site within this link as well. And like Will said, there's also international standards and lessons learned relevant to marine energy testing and measurements. So the testing and measurement section had a total overhaul this year. So it used to be marine energy testing and then marine energy measurements as two separate sections. And the flow of it, there was great information in there, but the flow of it was a little hard to follow. So we decided to incorporate the TEAMR layout and how they describe their testing facilities so that users and people in the marine energy industry who are familiar with TEAMR can come back here on Telesto and say, oh, okay, these are the kinds of tests that we can actually occur in those different settings. So updated, organized, and consolidated information within all of these different test settings, as well as information on the general test purpose, the overview of the testing procedure, as well as links to any relevant IEC standards you need to abide by when conducting these specific tests. And also one section on instruments and sensors that you can use to conduct these tests. And the goal is to end up linking the instrumentation and sensor data within this testing section into the instrumentation and sensors database, which we're also working on revamping this year. Back to Will for deployment.
Yeah, so deployment is on the next stage in our development pathway. And information here is starting to get a little sparse since hasn't been that many deployments in the US. But we start with historical deployments by linking back to the project's database, PRIMRE Knowledge Hub, and that is providing a historical record, national and international deployments, and it's curated and updated, so it's, you know, recent stuff too, and it's tied in by location, which devices are deployed, which open water, you know, there's open water test sites, and it also has a list of organizations that did the work. So you could go and look up your favorite marine energy developer and see what devices they've deployed where. It's a nice little database. We started developing a section on environmental monitoring, and of course that's going to link back to TEFIs, because TEFIs is the source of our environmental publications and a lot of other nice stuff in there. And I've linked back to the State of the Science report again, since that's sort of discussion of all the environmental issues that are going on and what is their latest. The final section in deployment, we've pulled up a link to PacWave South, example for an environmental assessment. They went through a lot of steps to get their environmental assessment done at PacWave South. And so if you're looking for information on various types of testing for environments, it's probably in there. There's also a publication that came out of that sort of describes the process they went through. Interesting reading. And next slide. Next slide, the sort of the final aspect of your development timeline is decommissioning. And pretty much we've got some guidance here. There's not a lot of specific guidance for marine energy, you know, wave and tidal energy converters, but there is guidance from BOEM. And BOEM being the person or the group you're going to have to go and get your lease through, they and the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement are responsible for decommissioning. So decommissioning is related, you know, it's related to the size of your device. If you have a single device you're doing a scale test on, it may just be you pull the anchor out and tell them you're gone and that's it. But if you're going to put in an array with a license through FERC, you're going to have to engage a lot of people and do a lot of planning and have some contingency planning. And so we put in this link to the BOEM decommissioning white paper, and that should cover a lot of the issues. It's particularly guidance for offshore wind, but there is a line in there. It covers renewable energy development offshore. So that's definitely who you're going to be talking to. The Citizen's Guide for Decommissioning Offshore Oil and Gas in Waters of California is, it seems like it might be a stretch, but this again is BOEM and BSEE, and they're the people you're going to be talking to if you have a lease offshore. So this focuses on oil and gas, but it's probably the same people thinking about the same things. It'd be really good to read that. We've also got some examples. We have two examples. One, Verdant Power at Roosevelt Island tidal energy sites. They went through decommissioning with FERC, and they've got a report out there in the FERC e-library, and we link to that, and you can read through that and see how they went about pulling all their stuff out of the water. And then we've got the report from CGen. So CGen was really sort of an exploratory installation almost, and their decommissioning, they ended up with a relatively large report. It's got detailed descriptions of methods. It talks about impacts on water quality, benthic ecology, fish ecology, human impacts being fishermen, and then there's like even a cumulative impact report. So there's a lot of detail in there you can investigate for thinking about your own decommissioning plans. Next slide. So the cross-cutting topics. So outside of the development pathway, there's the 5 cross-cutting topics: lessons learned, performance metrics, economics, standards, and compliance. And all of these will apply anywhere in the development pathway. So a little more detail on lessons learned. It was a WPTO project completed about a year ago, and the results are stored here on Telesto. And it was interviews with people who've been working in the field of marine energy. And those interviews were then distilled down to specific results, and that's what's reported here. And then we split those results out and split them up amongst the development pathway. But, the planning phase, you need to be thinking about funding sources and things like that. So that's lessons learned. Performance metrics, that was another WPTO project to define what are the important metrics that we should be using in marine energy. And that project is now, all those results are stored here, and you can go in and do sorts on them. And it was a form of improving communication. If you take the performance metrics and international standards, you should be able to characterize where your device is and how well it's doing, and be able to talk to people and with standard ideas. The economics page, this is where we have the levelized cost of electricity. The levelized cost of electricity, LCOE page, has been one of the most often visited pages on the entire PRIMRE website. And this has got references and downloadable references and example calculations, so very useful. We also have a link to NREL's JEDI tool, which is for characterizing economic impact. You put in an array offshore and how many jobs are going to be created in the nearby towns and cities. The standards page, that's where we're collecting all the standards for IEC, ISO, API. And so there you can read a description of what the standard is, and then it'll link you off to the store. IEC, you have to buy the standards to get the whole thing. The compliance page, this covers issues related to marine energy regulations, guidance, and certification. I think the main goal of this page is to show the relationships between regulations, standards, guidelines, and certifications. There's overlap between them, but different people have, govern the regulations versus govern the certifications. So this can explain some of that. Next page.
So when we're launching Telesto, the PRIMRE team decided to enhance some of the content living in there with some user-driven content feedback. So this is a little bit different from the lessons learned page that Will just talked about. Lessons learned is kind of a semi-structured interview where you get feedback from people in industry and you write down essentially what they learned within these specific topics around PRIMRE. But the user-driven content has been focused mainly on Telesto for right now. And the example that we created with this content is marine energy testing. So you mentioned that earlier. It's the lab and bench, numerical modeling, open water testing information. All of that was mainly gathered through these, again, semi-structured interviews from industry experts to gain feedback and just general knowledge about what kind of tests are occurring within each of those settings. In the future, we are hoping to continue these semi-structured interviews to help enhance the instrumentation and sensors database. Right now, there's a lot of broken links in it. We are trying to revamp it, rebuild it, and ensure that the information that we have within Telesto in the database is representative of the current state of the marine energy industry. And I think Will's going to talk about future plans next.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of work to do to bring Telesto up to our vision. And this upcoming year, we're talking about the United States IEC TC114 webpage migrating onto Telesto. If you go into the standards page on Telesto, we have a link that takes you over to their current web page, but they wanted to move it over to Telesto. So it's going to actually become part of the OpenEI collection. Updating standards and compliance pages with IEC input. Johnson Colby has graciously offered to help us upgrade our standards and compliance pages. So that should be fun and get us up to the latest and greatest. As mentioned before, we're planning on rebuilding the instrumentation and sensor database. And we want to be able to link sensors to environmental monitoring specific tests. Tethys has got some of that broken down already. So if we can make that connection between the instrumentation we've got and the tests that Tethys have, that'd be a really good source of information, I think. There's also on the horizon a tool that was developed with Sandia National Labs, funded by WPTO, which is the design case load generator. So, test parts of your devices at various loads on different locations. So that would be very cool. It's got to make it through some online cybersecurity issues, but that should be coming in the near future. And we've got a demo, which I think Cesar is going to run.
Yes. Thanks, Will. I think here we go. I have it up on the screen so that we can all, and Will and Megan had some kind of use cases that they just kind of thought up, that just to show the audience kind of the pathway or the clicking that one would do to get the information that one is after. So I asked Will or Megan to provide their suggestion as to the scenario.
So the first scenario we thought of, let's say you're a part of a student group at an Oregon university that has designed and built a WEC. And now you need to do some testing to find out the WEC's characteristics. And one thing you want to do is find out the natural frequency. So luckily you have a wave tank nearby. And you're thinking, well, okay, how do we test that in a wave tank? So you could go to the test development pathway, and the page opens, and like, oh, look, there's a picture of a device in a wave tank. This could be good. So marine energy testing. Going down to marine energy testing, you find there's a tile that says tank, flume, and basin testing. And if you click on that, it takes you to a free decay test. And the purpose of that free decay is to determine the friction effects and natural period frequency of the marine energy device. It's like, well, that's what you're looking for. And if you scroll down, you see there's a whole, dynamic mooring test, hull test, power performance tests. There's a lot of stuff that you can consider doing testing in a wave tank.
And before we move on to the next scenario the other thing we want to make sure we also highlight is that we've set up the navigation so that there's like a set of breadcrumbs. So if the user goes down kind of a bit of a rabbit hole, they can always take a step back or to where they started to get to that point. So if I go back to the Telesto main page, so that's that particular scenario. Is there any other ones that y'all had in mind?
There's an obvious one. So if you consider that you're applying for a FOA from WPTO, And the application asks for an estimate of your levelized cost of electricity. Like, well, I know Telesto's got something on LCOE, so where might that be? You can go to performance metrics, and there's like 37 results in performance metrics, and you just scroll down the L section. You've got things like levelized avoided cost of energy, levelized cost of data, levelized cost of energy. So if you click on levelized, the blue, which is a link, levelized cost of energy link, that'll take you to another page. That gives you metric definitions, cost breakdown structures, various equations. And that's, well, okay, that's good, but you know, if you take the breadcrumbs back to the main Telesto page, there's also the economics link. If you go to the economics link, there's all our references for levelized cost of energy, including there's a link down there under additional LCOE guidance resources for the system advisor model, which allows for like some techno-economic modeling to help you get some costs and output. So yeah, so LCOE, there's plenty of information. And it looks like we're at a place where we could open this up for questions.
I think there would have been a few more slides. Just
oh, okay.
Okay, so I just really quickly, we wanted to also highlight a few other PRIMRE events that will happen in the future. One is that PRIMRE will be hosting a workshop at the PAMIC conference in January 2024. We're really looking forward to that. I think Will be one of the ones leading that workshop.
Yes, down in Barranquilla, Colombia.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be PRIMRE always participates at the PAMIC conference, and it's a really great event. Also, other aspects is that the Marine Energy Software Knowledge Hub is also undergoing a revamping, and that where the goal is to get that finished in June 2024. So look forward to seeing that coming in the future. And the other event that PRIMRE will be hosting is the International Data Sharing Workshop that will probably occur in the May 2024 timeframe, and that's when we invite other groups similar to PRIMRE from around the globe to participate in this workshop and kind of discuss the aspects of data sharing and how we can do that, collectively, so that we can all learn from the great progress and and other lessons that we've done around the world. And then next, we just really wanted to highlight that while it was us three that were talking, the PRIMRE project is a very large team, have a lot of support from lots of people. Just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge them all here, including the other PIs, John Weirs from NREL and Andrea Copping from PNNL, and all the other various groups that are working on it from each of the labs. And I guess we can start to open it up for questions and feedback. But the last thing that I really wanted to emphasize is for the user-driven content. Well, we've kind of started with asking a few folks at Sandia and some of the people that we work with at Sandia to try to improve of that. We are in the process of opening the door to that was kind of a little bit of a test phase of that aspect. We are, if anybody in this audience has content that they would like, that they think should be included in Telesto, please feel free to reach out to us, at the email, and we can either kind of gauge, communicate with each other via email, or even just have a short meeting and kind of talk about, how we can improve upon that. And we will not only be doing this exercise at Sandia, but the other two labs that are participating on PRIMRE and other experts that we interact with in the field. So we're really looking forward to that. And if there's any other questions, we're happy to answer them. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So your first question is, can you say a little bit more about the instrumentation and sensors database and the status of that?
I'll let Megan answer that question.
Yeah, sure. So as of right now, it exists. We just have it hidden within Telesto. We've incorporated the measurements section that used to exist under the marine energy testing section onto the homepage of the database. But right now it's a bit outdated. There's a lot of broken links, a lot of sensors that have gone off market and such. So right now we're trying to create a requirements document to figure out what kind of instrumentation and sensors do we actually want to include in the database, and what kind of detail do you want to provide. Yeah, so it's in the works right now, and we're also planning on utilizing the user-driven feedback to help us come up with accurate information of what sensors are going to be used in the industry today.
Yeah, and we have no real timeline as to when that will be finished, but we're trying to get that done in the next fiscal year or two. So yeah, thank you, Megan. Any other questions?
I got an interesting question from Sean Ryan. He said, would it be possible to somehow engage developers to share information, perhaps anonymously, about their insurance and bonding experiences, or what the market looks like? And also, under supply chain, how about adding known supply chain? So marine service providers, fabricators, any of that information.
For the first piece about experiences about was it bonding, or say that again?
Yeah, insurance and bonding experiences.
That is a very interesting topic, and that's one of the great things that we would like to talk about in terms of like the lessons learned aspects. So the lessons learned project that Will talked about, it's kind of that phase of it concluded about a year ago, but we're in the process of revamping it up. And if you have any content that you would like to share with us, feel free to reach out, or we can reach out and kind of talk about how that experience was. And because we're going to start to update that content throughout the rest of the, starting in the new calendar year. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry, I can't see the chat right now.
The second part of the question was, under supply chain, how about adding known supply chain contributors such as marine service providers, fabricators, etc.?
That is as part of that lessons learned exercise that we conducted, some time ago. That is one of the things that all of the folks that we talked about that is lacking, is that there is no set supply chain for the industry. And this is something that DOE is aware of, and they've kind of been working in the background to try to build that, or to like get either the labs or others to try to build that out. I'm not really sure where that kind of phase is, but this is something that I know that especially like because there's just so many different pieces, it's being worked on, but we don't know what phase it is and what phase it's at. And I don't know if anybody else on the call, whether it be Will or Megan or even Haley, if y'all have any more to add to that.
Yeah, we talked about this in the past, and maybe starting the focus by going to the facilities database and reaching out to the point of contact there and saying, who are the service providers that are right around you? If someone comes to a wave tank and something breaks, who do they call? That could be a useful way to start a very sort of local and focused type of database. So yeah, we're thinking about this.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and something that us and DOE is very aware of. Any other questions in the little bit of time that we have left? If not, we're happy to conclude the webinar here. I really want to thank everybody who attended the webinar, and as I stated earlier, the recording will be available sometime after we've done a little bit of cleanup on it. And if you have any feedback for Telesto in terms of content you want to add to it, or like the great point that was brought up a little while ago about something that could fit into one of like lessons learned or like performance metrics, some kind of aspect that you think could need some update, we welcome that feedback, because Telesto is going to be kind of like a something that's going to be like a living guidance piece that we want to be continuously updating, and the community will help guide what content lives on Telesto. So I thank everybody for participating, and